Respected people of all identities present in the audience, welcome to the 13th edition of Bhutan Echoes, Drukyal's Literature and newly added Art Festival. My name is Sangay Loday. I am a queer youth consultant and a theatre performer, and I will be your moderator for today on the theme Bodies of Narrative, exploring gender, identity, and artistic expression. And let me introduce Ms. Tashani Doshi, a poet, a journalist, and a dancer. I'm very excited to get in the conversation with her. Would you like to introduce yourself with more?
No more introductions. I think plenty of introductions. It's lovely to be here in Bhutan, and very happy to be back. I was here more than 20 years ago and was struck by the beauty of the place, and I'm so happy to be here. And shoot, fire away. What are the questions you have? Let's chat.
Thank you very much for your comfort. Before we start the Q&A, I would just like to remind the audience that we are going to be discussing on gender and literature, and to request that gender is a very complicated and socially constructed conceptualization. So I would like to request everyone to express their opinions, but sensitively, because we need to respect your diversities and opinions as well. So with that, I will only have 5 simple questions, because I would like to hand over the opportunity to the audience to engage more with Ms. Tashani. My first question is, what does gender mean to you?
You know, when I was growing up in Madras, in now Chennai, I was always called Paiyan, which is a boy. I had a boy cut, and I was not interested in anything that had to do with anything vaguely feminine, kitchen, or I was outside on my bike, I was climbing trees. I was really, although I played a lot with dolls and things like that. And I think that from a very young age, it was perplexing to me that there was this division of duties, of hierarchies, of who gets to do what. In my grandfather's house, we would go for lunch, big Gujarati family and small dining table, and not enough room for everybody to sit. So the men would sit first, then the children would sit, and then the women would sit. And I was always hungry, I still am, so I would just be like, I'm gonna sit with the men. And I was allowed, I would sit, and then I would go take the nap. And I thought, oh, it's great to be a guy, you know, the hot rotlis are coming from the kitchen, and I don't have to go and do all that stuff. And you know, and as a result, I avoided cooking anything till I was in college, and even then, I'm still now really not a good cook. And it's a weird thing where you sort of shun these basic life skills like cooking for some idea of, I don't want to be trapped within that what I see, my aunts or my mother or my grandmother or whoever it is. And I think in general, for me as an artist, I'm really interested in the idea of freedom. And where do we get to be most free? I worked as a dancer for many years. I still dance, and primarily I'm a poet and a novelist. And I've often thought that, wouldn't it be wonderful to imagine a world without gender? Like, just to be this kind of, or all genders in one, you know. So you can occupy this space of great power by harnessing these elements that are not necessarily one thing or the other. It's just who I am, you know. And so I think over the years, I'm always shifting and changing, but it's true that a lot of my work has been about responding to gender violence. We know that a lot of the violence is committed by men against women and against men, so it's traveling in that direction. And so as a person who identifies as a woman and with my body as a woman, I also have to sort of understand, well, there are all these powers that I keep being told that I have growing up in India, the idea of the Devi, the goddess, the mother, this immense source of power in Tantra, which I was using in dance. And then there are the news headlines. And how do you reconcile then moving your body through the streets, through public spaces, feeling a sense of danger, feeling a sense of, oh, I might be violated, yet being able to see that, oh, this feminine force, this divine female principle is really this originating source. So I think mostly for me, gender has been a very confusing exercise that I constantly grapple with. And I aim to be free of that in my writing. And the best moments I've had have been on stage, have been while I've been writing, when I could be actually out of body experience, I would say, leave my body behind and inhabit some other space which is not constrained by gender. So I think that's how I feel about it, that this is the construct of our world. This is how we have to negotiate. But what are the avenues where we can transcend? You know, and for me, it's been through dancing and through writing.
I'm very happy that you said gender is confusing, which is a really good thing, by the way, because in a society where binary men and women are the norm, to be confused is a type of protest. Yes, it's where you find your own identity. So whenever someone tells me, oh, Sangay, I'm confused, I'm like, good, be confused, because the world does not let you be confused. And being confused in a world like that lets you win something. And I really connected with what you said, how you grew up. You were trying to do things that you were not supposed to, right? Exchanging roles.
Apparently a very Bhutanese
Yes.
trait I learned this morning. You do what you're not supposed to do.
Yes. When I was growing up, I was told not to wash dishes because, not to cook, not to wash dishes because it's a woman's thing to do. But I want to feed myself, right? I want to eat. I want to keep the house clean. So I used to force myself to cook and clean dishes. So I can really resonate with what you said on how you say replacing roles with the current ones. So I had one more question on your journey in literature. From the first book you had, Pleasure Seekers, right? To your most recent one, Small Night and Days?
Small Days and Nights.
Small Days and Nights. So your journey into literature that you've felt till now, can you please explain to us how has your journey been? From 2010, your first book?
Yeah, actually,
Yes.
I wanted to be a poet when I was in college. I was studying business administration, and I was quite good at it. And then I took a class in creative writing. And this was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was suddenly struck by language and its possibilities. And I was always in love with language and reading and all of that. But I suddenly thought, I want to be a poet. And so I ditched I finished the degree. I'm a good Gujarati girl in that sense. I finished the degree. And then I just thought, but I don't really want to be I want to be a poet. And how does one go about being a poet? There is no guidebook for that. I did go to graduate school. I went to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. I did a master's. Still no idea how to be a poet. I went to London, I worked. Still no idea how to be a poet. Then I moved back to India, and when I was in my mid-20s, I met, this coincided with my moving back to India, I met a woman called Chandralekha, who was a very famous dancer, choreographer. She had also worked with the feminist movement. She was a wonderful, radical, beautiful person that I met. And I worked with her for the next 5 years until she died in her last choreography. And I think I got my education on how to be an artist in her house. So every day I would go to her house, and she didn't have any chairs in her house. She only had swings. So you would sit on these wooden swings, and everybody would talk to each other. And every evening there was somebody there. There were filmmakers, there were painters, there were people involved in grassroots movement. There were mango farmers, heart surgeons. Every kind of person was there. And for the first few years, I never spoke. I just listened, and I heard people talking about politics, about, what are you doing with your life? And it was this dissolving of art-life membrane for me in Chandra's house. And I think that was where my journey as a writer began, because I did not want to be a dancer. I'm not a trained dancer. I didn't study dance. But she saw me, and she made me into a dancer at the age of 26, which is when a lot of dancers are retiring. So I suddenly had this new career as a dancer. And through that, I learned that actually, if you want to do anything in life, whether it's a poet or whether it's running your own business or anything, you need discipline. and especially as a writer, because writers can do a lot of cheating. You can just sit at your desk, you can just look at your computer and be thinking, oh yeah, I'm working, don't disturb me, I'm working, and actually you're just, checking your mail and you're, fooling around doing useless things. And I think going into the theater, working 3 hours every morning with my body, you can't cheat on that. You have to do it. And that was the place where I sort of understood that actually I do want to do this thing, which is I want to work with words. So I began as a poet. I published my first book, Countries of the Body, in 2006. And I had been wanting to publish, young writers, I think you're so eager to put your work into the world. And I was also working on a novel at the time, The Pleasure Seekers, and my editor at Bloomsbury, she said, don't be in a hurry, just slow down. And also Chandra used to say, just slow down, just slowness is the luxury we have left. And so always I was being told, just slow down. And I think that was the best advice. I took my time to publish, and then I said, well, I wanted to write a novel because the canvas of the novel allows you this ambition, this scope. And so I moved, and I still move between poetry, between nonfiction, between fiction. It's all words after all. But poetry remains it's like, you go around the world and you come home. So that's my coming home. Yeah, so that's me.
I think the best part about meeting Tashani was that I didn't text her until yesterday, okay? But
Should we? You were saying. First text message yesterday.
So yes, I'm really happy about the way I met Tashani because I only texted her yesterday. But before that, I read her poems. And whenever my friend writes poems, even when they scribble down, they're like, oh, it's just nothing. But I'm very happy that I'm able to read that in front of the poet, in front of whoever wrote the poem. Because you don't just know the person there, you know a part of their heart, right? Because that's how poems work. And I was really happy to read one of her poems, which was very exciting. So what I got from your conversation right now was network, the people you surrounded yourself by that really taught you how to cut down that artistic membrane, right? Discipline from theater, which I have yet to learn more and more about, discipline.
Yeah.
And yes, I think I can really connect with how you found your roots in poetry, but also combined with dancing. Yes. And right now, I think Tashani is really excited to present us with a performance. So I'll hand the stage over to her.
I'll do a few poems and then we'll continue chatting and open it up to questions with the time that we have left. Sangay, can you just pass me my book, please? There, it's on just in case. So I have a confession to make, which is that I was a poetry evangelist, which means that for a long part of my life, I believed that I had seen the light of poetry, and so I had to show everybody the light of poetry as well. I moved somewhat out of that phase. And I think partly it's because the way that I think of as a guru, I was talking about Chandralekha, that you don't seek out your guru. The guru arrives at the time when you need or when you are ready. And similarly, I think poetry arrives in your life when you need it or when you are ready. And also, in a way, I think I was always thinking about poetry as revelation, epiphany, light, light, light. And when I found out that guru is not somebody who takes you to light, but someone who removes the darkness, I was very struck by that reframing of the light and dark. That poetry is also, I guess, a place of shadows more than light, and that it's in the shadows that we see most clearly. So I want to begin with a poem which is from my evangelism period, and it's a contract between me, the poet, where I ask you not to forsake me, and you, the reader, who promises to be with me. And the poet in this poem takes on the form of a mosquito that is slightly insistent and buzzing in your ears. So this is Contract. Dear reader, I agree to turn my skin inside out, to reinvent every lost word, to burnish, to steal, to do what I must in order to singe your lungs. I will forego happiness, stab myself repeatedly and lower my head into countless ovens. I will fade backwards into the future and tell you what I see. If it is bleak, I will lie so that you may live seized with wonder. If it is miraculous, I will send messages in your dreams and they will flicker as a silvered cottage in the woods, choked with vines of moonflower. Don't kill me, reader. This neck has been working for years to harden itself against the axe. This body, meager as it is, has lost so many limbs to wars, so many eyes and hearts to romance. But love me, and I will follow you everywhere, to the dusty corners of childhood, to every downfall and resurrection, till your skin becomes my skin. Let us be twins, our blood thumping after each other like thunder and lightning. And when you put your soft head down to rest, dear reader, I promise to always be there, humming in the dungeons of your auditory canals, an immortal mosquito, hastening you towards fury, towards incandescence. Thank you. This next poem is from the new collection, A God at the Door. And it was written, I guess, at the height of the Me Too movement. I wanted to read it today since we're talking about gender. It's called Every Unbearable Thing. Say you began as rib or clod of earth. Say you were blossoming until someone stared too long at your shirt and leaned in, unbuttoned, pushed, forced. Don't mistake me. This is not a poem against longing, but against the kind of one-way desire that herds you into a dead-end alley, and how this can lead to a weakened epidermis and despair and nights of howling. And who can you tell except mother, friend, cat, while sky keeps on being sky and streets fill with danger? Say you survive, and mostly you're okay, because turns out you can carry cauldrons of hurt, and your heart is as strong as a giant carbon atom. Say you gather sisters and tell each other legends about when women were keepers of the universe, when gardens proliferated between our thighs, and even if we were hacked and scattered over the earth, temples would grow from the bits of us. Even the cosmos, seriously, the cosmos stemmed from us. In other words, we were the beginning, the origin of the world. Say all this has vanished, like the great auks, those awkward, flightless birds mistaken for witches. Say those legends have gone into a kind of extinction and we have grown silent as an underground stream, and every now and again one of us would amass enough steam to plunge over a cliff like a waterfall, shouting a name, and even though the sound she made was thunderous, nobody heard and she disappeared, and we did not ask where she went to or why. Heart, atom, danger, wants not to break apart. And it is hard to say why our ears and tongues went off to be pilgrims in the valley of silence without leaving a note, or how the thorns got plucked from our throat. But now they've returned. We must make up the beds and unpack the cases. We must listen to every unbearable thing until we too can name our unbearable things, until the sound of unbearable is deafening. And it is like the fairy tale after a long spell of sleep. It is wake up, people. It is time to find our way back. Bridges are burning and towers have collapsed. And some will say the witches are returning. But really, it is the world asking to be made again. So let us bring flowers. Let us bow down. Let us worship and reveal our scars. Let us. Thank you. This next poem was written in response to an incident, an event which happened in May 2020. It was the first year of COVID. Armed gunmen went into a maternity clinic in Kabul and killed mothers, newborns, nurses. I don't know how many of you remember. Now we are living on carnage on such a larger scale. But when I wrote this poem, I couldn't understand how that most innocent and primal of places, a place of birth, could be attacked. And I wrote the poem, and I wanted to read it today because, again, we are talking about gender. One of the articles that I was referencing talked about how a woman came and she wanted to claim her sister's body. And she was not allowed to. The doctor said, go and bring a man. And I thought, because it was in Afghanistan and this was the way that the system was there, and I thought about the sadness of having to lose your sister and then not being able to honor her body by not being able to receive it. So I think the poem came out of there, and it is called After a Shooting at a Maternity Clinic in Kabul. No one forgets there is a war going on, but there are moments you could be forgiven for believing the city is still an orchard, a place where you could make a thing grow. There's always a pile of rubble from which some desperate person struggles to rise while another person wraps a shawl around their shoulders and roasts marshmallows over a fire. This is not that. This is not bomb dropping from sky, human shield, hostages in a stream, child picking up toy that explodes in her hands. Although there's always that. Hope is a booby trap. This is the house you were brought to after crossing a river, leaving the mountains and burnt fields behind. A place of safety where you could be alone with your own startling power. Not why were you out and why wasn't your face covered and who told you to climb into that rickshaw. But here, prepare for this most ordinary thing, a birth. And this is not to ask what it means never to see someone again, but to ask what it means not to make it past the first checkpoint of your mother's gates. Never mind all the wild places outside, the mud brick villages, the valleys and harvests and glasses of green tea. Or even to say, I am here to claim the child of Suraya because you know this to be impossible. Even if you could bring a man and recover your sister's corpse and the newborn, where do you go from here? You still have to consider the bodies, the bullet-ridden walls. You still have to find the small window in this house and take in the panorama. See, It is raining outside, and men weep for their wives, and perhaps the entire world is an orchard that has detonated its crimson fruits, its pomegranates and poppies and tart mulberries to wash these floors red. And those of us who stand outside this house know that nothing will flourish here again. Like crowds who gather for an execution, we can only ask, what does it mean to be born in a graveyard, to enter the world saying, "O thief, O life"? Thank you. Thank you. I'll end with one last poem, and then we'll bring Sangay back. And I wanted to read this poem, which it's a poem for poets. And I think for those of you who may be poets in the audience or wanting to write poetry, I think that there's always a moment where you have a kind of existential crisis. What is the point of being a poet? What is the point of poetry? What can poetry do? Can poetry stop a bullet? Can poetry change legislation? Can poetry cure, cancer? No. And I wrote this poem to acknowledge that we are still reading poems that are over thousands and thousands of years old, and that poems have always been a way for us to understand who we are. And so this is a poem for my fellow poets, and it's called Find the Poets. I arrived in a foreign land yesterday, a land that has seen troubles. Who hasn't, you might say, but this land with its scrubbed white houses and blue seas, where everything was born and now it seems everything could vanish. I wanted to find out the truth about how a great land like this could allow ancient columns to crumble and organ grinders to disappear. Find the poets, my friend said. If you want to know the truth, find the poets. But friend, where do I find the poets? In the soccer fields, at the seashore, in the bars, drinking? Where do the poets live these days, and what do they sing about? I looked for them in the streets of Athens, at the train station, and in the flea market. I thought one of them might have sold me a pair of sandals, but he did not speak to me of poetry, only of his troubles, of how his house was taken from him, of all the dangers his children must now be brave enough to face. Find the poets, my friend said. They will not speak of the things you and I speak about. They will not speak of economic integration or fiscal consolidation. They could not tell you anything about the burden of adjustment, but they could sit you down and tell you how poems are born in silence and sometimes in moments of great noise, of how they arrive like the rain unexpectedly cracking open the sky. They will talk of love, of course, as if it were the only thing that mattered, of chestnut trees and mountaintops and how much they miss their dead fathers. They will talk like they have been talking for centuries about holding the throat of life till all the sunsets and lies are choked out, till only the bones of truth remain. The poets, my friend, are where they have always been, living in paper houses along rivers and forests that are disappearing. And while you and I go on with life, remembering and forgetting, the poets remain singing, singing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Come. So,
Poetry. Poetry is becoming a lost art. I am so honored that, I get to interview a poet. Because there was one guy that I liked. And I was like, I like you very much that I will write poems about you. I glorify you. And he laughed. And I was like, I'll wait for that word to get in your head, no? Because poetry is something. It's really something. And your poems,
Thank you. Thank you so much.
it's there, the emotions. I'll give you all a second to feel it, yeah? Okay.
Second is over. Okay.
1 second.
Yeah. I don't know how much time we have. I'm sure someone will tell you. But
I'll cover one perspective
One,
along with
yeah.
you, and we'll open
Yeah.
the floor
Sure.
for
Sure.
questions and answers. So one perspective that I wanted to cover under this theme,
Yes.
gender, identity, and artistic expressions, is one of Tashani's poems known as, and please do mind my language, it's called The Comeback of Speedos.
Yeah.
No, don't be ashamed.
No. I just wanted to. I'm glad you brought that up because, I don't only write poems about difficult and sad things. I also write joyful and happy and funny poems. And Comeback of Speedos, kind of, but it does go to a dark place.
Yes. No, but what was really connecting with the theme about this poem was that it spoke about the mystery of flesh. So imagine growing up in a world where we're always clothed, and then suddenly we go to another country where they're in Speedos and bikinis, and we're like, oh, what are they doing? But it also speaks about how mysterious the skin can be when it comes to your gender, your identity, and how you express yourself. So I think this poem really fits in, especially the part where you said it's treason. How did it go?
Yeah. So I'll just, it's a very tiny poem. It's called The Comeback of Speedos. And I had read a news article about how small swimming trunks are coming back in vogue. But I was in Italy at the time. My husband's Italian. I was like, it's never gone out of vogue in Italy. They're always wearing Speedos. But anyway, that's a side topic. And I was suddenly remember this. As a teenager, growing up in Madras, I was doing this thing called the Gymkhana in the gala, the swimming gala, where we were doing synchronized swimming, a bunch of us girls, and we had to wear this really ridiculous swim hat with a candle, and we had to get in the water and swim with this candle on top. And our bandmaster was somebody who I refer to in my poem as Mr. G. Mr. G wore tiger-striped Speedos. And we endlessly found it funny because, I don't know, we were teenage girls and it was like all this, and the hair and the flesh. And it was all of this. And we used to just complain about it a bit. And I sort of wrote the poem in the shape of a Speedos because I like shaped poems. So it's a tiny little thing on the page, I can't show you now, but anyway, it's in the shape of Speedos. And the last line, I talk about, we could not imagine such freedom for ourselves. To open our legs was treason. We held our breath. And I think on one level, I really, on some notion must have thought, what freedom Mr. G has? Like, he's not caring about how he looks in his body or any of that stuff that I think a lot of people worry about. He was just free, happy in the water in his tiger-striped trunks. Wish that we all could be that way.
Yes.
But yeah, so it is something that we have to negotiate always, and I think our cultures and our backgrounds do give us certain things to think about in that regard, yeah.
So what came to my mind as soon as I read the poem was the freedom of flesh, right?
Yeah.
Being able to expose and embrace parts of yourself openly. And if you know what underwear looks like, then you know how the poem looked like. Yeah. So with this, I would like to open the floor for questions and answers, please. Please do keep in mind, gender is a socially constructed norm, and to please keep your questions sensitive. Any questions? Yes, there's one over here.
Tashani Doshi. Tashani Madam ji, namaste. Good afternoon. Royal Queen Mother, with due regard to our regular presence here and having pleasure of having a beautiful lady, a poet, a dancer like me. Ma'am, my question is, Actually, I was a singer, dancer since 1983. But 2014, one of my, vocal cords got paralyzed. Thereafter, I could not sing a song. And the COVID came to Bhutan. And now, after the departure of COVID, I started dancing to the tunes of the songs sang by beautiful ladies with curves and gentlemen with handsome face, long hair, smiling every time. But my question is not that. My question is, after the departure of COVID, I've been dancing to the tune in all the clubs, right from Space 34, Viva City, Avenues, Thimphu City, and all the karaokes. But wherever I go and dance, ma'am, the impression of the audience is, this guy is drunk. Would you believe it? I'm a tattoo teller.
So, what's the question?
Can you repeat the question once?
Yeah. My question is, I've been dancing for the last 3 years, but nobody is thinking that I'm a dancer. They always think that I'm drunk or I'm crazy. So how do I now become a poet like you in dancing?
Okay.
First of all, thank you very much, sir, for being very vulnerable with your story. And yes,
Yeah. The question, I really enjoyed the session before lunch. We were talking about identity, and I think how we construct our ideas of ourselves. It's interesting that we might have an idea and other people have a different idea of what they see. And, I'm always charmed by going to places where there is a lot of dancing, because dance actually, real dance, in the sense of dance as a community event, dance as something that we just gather and do, you don't have to follow certain steps or do certain things. It's a personal expression, and then you're all together doing it. And I love that sometimes you see people who have they're not following the music that you're listening to. They're doing something else. I mean, anyone who's been to an Indian wedding or can know that, there's this one uncle is doing his own, aunties, cousins. So it's like everybody's on their own rhythm, and that's okay. I think that we have to have more places where it's not a question of are you doing the right thing or are you doing what we consider dance, but I think just the very fact of gathering and moving, and especially if there's like a drum involved, it's so primal, it's so coded into us with music, with song, with other people, that, we don't have enough space for that. I feel like I don't do it often enough. So sometimes in my own room, I just put the music on and I dance, and I think a lot of people do it, and it's okay. But in terms of how other people view you, I can't answer that, because unfortunately, that's how we live, and we cannot force somebody to see us in the way that we see ourselves. We can only live our lives the way we do, and hope that you will be recognized by people. Maybe, yeah.
if I may add a small
please.
bit to that, yes. If you can feel your own individual rhythm, sir, then I think that in itself is very beautiful, because most people are like not dancing at all. Listen, standing on the corner, watching, stalking, So it's better to feel your own rhythm than to be like that, sir. And I think that's very beautiful. So we'll take one more question, or how you felt during Ms. Tashani's performance. We'll take one more and we'll end the session.
Yeah, sure.
You can either ask a question or you can express yes. That's the founder of... yes, over.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much, Tashani, for sharing your wonderful poetry with us. I mean, it's a very different experience when you read the poetry and there is actually someone who has written the work and is in front of you and sharing her poetry with us. So it was very beautiful. With this, I think towards the beginning of the session, I think there was a wonderful discussion about gender and how you, in a way, when you were young, you felt that like, especially in terms of gender role, I mean, like how you felt that I think it was not applicable. Also towards the point that you felt that there were like some other, I think, advantage of being, let's say, the other gender as well. So my question for you is like, especially I think it got me very curious. So my question for you is, how can writer, I think, break away from generational conditioning of thinking about gender in binaries, ensuring their creativity is not constrained by it? And what are the processes that you undertake as a writer, poet, and a dancer to achieve this? Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I work, I'm a professor at NYU in Abu Dhabi, and I teach students there. And I think for me, one of the really interesting things is to keep the generational link and not to assume that it's always learning from one way, but that we're learning in every direction. So I have really interesting discussions and ideas exchanged with my students and what they are concerned about and what they are writing about. And I know that, for instance, the way that I think about gender is not like, it is the topic of this generation. It is what they are fighting for. They're fighting for language, they're fighting for rights, they're fighting for a different reimagining of something that I sort of have let's say, I understood that, okay, this is the patriarchal system. Within that, this is how I go through it. And then within my own work, I pay a lot of attention to the experiences of women, and I concentrate a lot about, you know, in India. And I try to think of, like, say, feminism as being something that is not that, okay, it's just about equality for women. It's a kind of reimagining what are the structures that we can make to make the world beautiful. I think one of the things as a poet I worry and I struggle with the most is that on the one hand, I see humans as being completely vile and horrible and destructive and violent. And then on the other, I see humans as being so full of beauty and tenderness and making song and architecture and art and just helping one another. And so on one, I have these two, how do you reconcile that we are this and we are that? We are this and we are that. And I think in some ways, it's about true art, true writing for me, really figuring out what is the role of transformation, not just in my individual life, but in the communities that I share, in the societies that I share, but also in terms of our imagination. Is this one way only the way? Can we imagine something that is more humane, more beautiful, more tender, more, you know, less hung up about anatomy? You know, who knows? I hope so. But I think that for me, I'm always thinking about what is the role of transformation in work? How do you write about violence without perpetuating violence? How do you try to restore dignity? How do you try to reclaim strength? And I think that for me, language has been a huge, huge area of trying to understand that actually, no, words are not just nothing. They are magic. You can create a chant, you can create a cadence, you can create a poem, you can create a mantra with words, and that has a certain energy, and that has a power to change. And so I believe in language, and I have given my entire writing life to saying, no, find the right word, find the right language. And I think that extends to the idea of gender and identity as well. Yeah.
I think through advocacy, what I learned is it's always been like man, woman, But now the point is not to make it man and woman, but to make it man and woman, right? Yes. Because woman has always been there, and the only thing we have to change is the way we want to see them as they are, not as what we want to see them as. And with this, I would like to end this session with a haiku that I wrote for you. It's about yesterday. So, crowd that I looked in, you who I couldn't find in, a poem hidden. That's for you. Thank you very much, Botanicals, and thank you very much, Tashani Doshi, for this session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.